Faster than a speeding bullet, and unlike any other aircraft ever built, it raced the sun and won. Flying at speeds of 2,000 miles an hour, in the top 1% of the Earth's atmosphere, it holds every major speed and altitude record for a jet.
You did all of this effortlessly, and that was the feeling you had, that you had control of so much power.
It was the world's first stealth aircraft, flying over enemy territory and photographing 100,000 square miles of the Earth's surface in an hour.
You were sitting at the very front of that 107-foot-long spear penetrating enemy airspace. You were truly the tip of the sword. If anything went wrong, we would be on the 6 o'clock news.
Once shrouded in secrecy, Battle Stations now reveals, using archive film and color reenactments, the covert world of the SR-71 Blackbird. During World War I, the first reconnaissance aircraft were developed to photograph the enemy in an attempt to gain a tactical advantage. World War II saw more sophisticated aircraft and camera technology that played a vital role in the Allied victory. After the Second World War, the world was left with two ideologically opposed superpowers. The Cold War had begun, and the United States wanted to keep a watchful eye on events behind the Iron Curtain. America was desperate for information about Soviet nuclear stockpiling, fighter capability, and bomber threat. In early December 1954, the task of creating the next generation of reconnaissance aircraft was assigned to the visionary designer Kelly Johnson and his elite team from Lockheed's Advanced Development Program, known as the Skunk Works.
I think Kelly's operation of the Skunk Works was probably unique in aviation industry. To start with, he had a very, very small cadre of people. He handpicked everyone that worked for him. They were swore to ultimate secrecy. There was absolutely no leaks within the system. He was guaranteed of that. He also made it a point to co-locate his engineers and his producers, the people who were building the airplane. So the engineer could come up with the drawing and he would walk out on the hangar floor and talk to the man who's bending metal.
Can't stress enough the engineers directly with the shop people all the time. And Kelly, when you had a problem, you'd have a meeting and decisions were made right then. He was always very fair. He could be very tough. He was no pussycat, I'll tell you.
Kelly's Skunk Works produced their first spy plane in 1955, the U-2. In an effort to evade Soviet radar, the U-2 was designed to fly at an altitude of 75,000 feet. In 1956, it began overflying the Soviet Union on reconnaissance missions. But the Soviets' latest radar systems were more advanced than had been anticipated.
When the U-2 flown by the CIA first began their operations over the Soviet Union, they were shocked to discover that the Soviets were tracking them even on the very first mission.
Every U-2 flown over the Soviet Union was in serious danger.
The U-2 was being tracked, and that was a great concern to not only to our country, but to Lockheed, who had promised that this airplane would never be seen.
Determined to create the ultimate spy plane, Kelly Johnson returned to the drawing board. He began designing a new supersonic aircraft that could fly faster and higher than the U-2 with the lowest possible presence on enemy radar screens. Then, on the 1st of May 1960, disaster struck. A U-2 flown by Francis Gary Powers was shot down by an SA-2 missile. Powers survived and had a very public trial, designed to humiliate the US and deter them from carrying out any further reconnaissance flights. But with tensions between the superpowers mounting, the need for reconnaissance was more urgent than ever. Kelly Johnson's plans for an advanced supersonic spy plane became the #1 priority. In order to create an aircraft capable of operating at the speeds and altitudes that Kelly envisaged, his Skunk Works team would have to overcome a series of huge technological problems.
And the biggest problem that he was going to face, and he knew this up front, was going to be temperature. The temperatures that the aircraft would encounter at those speeds were phenomenal.
It was clear that a traditional aluminium airframe would not withstand these extreme conditions.
You could not fly an airplane past 2.6 Mach, and you just barely make it then with aluminum because the airplane had just turned to jelly.
The decision was made to build the airframe from titanium. Titanium was both light enough to reach altitudes in excess of 80,000 feet and strong enough to withstand the enormous temperatures generated by Mach 3 flight.
No one had ever built an airplane out of titanium. So he had to begin from scratch. We didn't even have tools that you could use to develop titanium and to bend it and to shape it and to make an airplane. So we had to start by designing tools. It was a gigantic undertaking.
Creating an aircraft able to cruise at Mach 3 was difficult enough, but the Skunk Works also had to face the challenge of combining this level of performance with the new science of stealth. To avoid features that would create strong radar reflections, the plane had taken on a revolutionary shape. The wings were blended into the body, and the long surfaces on the forward fuselage, known as chines, were designed to deflect incoming radar waves. As were the inward-angled twin fins, the pointed engine cones, and the nearly flat lower fuselage. Also, a special radar-absorbent plastic, or composite, was developed to be incorporated into all the leading edges.
When you look at an SR-71, 20% of what you see is composite. You know, it's just unbelievable at that time. And it was developed in our shops. An SR-71 was 100 times smaller radar return than an F-14, which is only half as big and was developed 10 years later. So that was the really, truly first airplane specifically designed with stealth in mind.
On the 22nd of December 1964, the SR-71 was rolled out onto the flight line at Lockheed's Burbank plant. Coated in black, radar-absorbent ferrite paint, the Blackbird, as it became known, was an extraordinarily futuristic-looking machine. Lockheed test pilot Robert Gilliland would be the first in the cockpit.
When we got going, as a matter of fact, for the actual first flight, it had 383 open items. These are things that are supposed to be working that aren't working. So it was a bare bones type of operation for the first flight. And you might say these kind of things could be dangerous, but there are plenty of other people that would like to have been in my position, I assure you of that.
The exhilaration when we made the first engine run and they had those afterburners going in there and that thing is straining against those cables, and I just felt, boy, this is really going to be something.
The flight lasted just over 1 hour, reaching top speeds of over 1,000 miles an hour, a phenomenal accomplishment for a first flight of any aircraft.
Kelly Johnson was there and some of his guests were there, and I don't remember who all else was there, but the whole kit and caboodle were very happy, including me.
It seemed that Kelly had created his ultimate spy plane. But would it be able to evade radar and fly high enough and fast enough to escape the Soviet fighters and missiles? Flying at speeds in excess of Mach 3, at altitudes over 80,000 feet, The SR-71 Blackbird was the fastest and highest flying jet in the world. In 1966, the first SR-71 spy plane was delivered to Beale Air Force Base in California. The first strategic reconnaissance squadron now needed an elite force of airmen to fly it.
Well, my first thought was, I sure hope that I'm selected for the program. I mean, that was ultimate, to get selected for the program.
In order to qualify for the SR-71, you had to be very good at what you were doing thus far in your aviation career. In fact, you had to be pretty much the best at what you did to be considered as a candidate.
Each Blackbird needed 2 crew members, the pilot and the RSO, the reconnaissance systems officer.
It was extremely exciting to just to get signed into Beale Air Force Base and to think that you're going to be flying this airplane. You cannot wait.
But the selection interviews and evaluations alone lasted a week and included a rigorous physical examination, the same as experienced by the astronaut corps.
And the first 2 days were physicals, an astronaut physical in a sense, taking an EKG on a treadmill and full body x-rays, just very extensive physical exam. They also wanted to know if you were the kind of person that they could live with on the road, because you had to spend a lot of time together. You know, in a sense, it's part of your family. And they wanted to evaluate people to see if they'd be a good member of that family.
The pilot began his actual training with long hours in T-38s and in the SR-71 simulator. The intense simulator sessions tested the crew members to their limits.
They basically made it a grueling experience. They would just give me multiple malfunctions to deal with. In fact, they just keep giving you another problem on top of another problem until you're juggling 5 or 6 or 7 balls at once, and eventually you have to start dropping them. And they would evaluate how you prioritized which ball do you drop.
After months of training, the crews were ready for their first flight together. The extreme speed and altitude called for special protection, and this came in the shape of the $120,000 pressure suit.
2 technicians suit you up. You step down into it, you put your arms into it, and it comes up to your back. The boots are separate from the suit, and they're just regular, real combat boots. The gloves are especially handmade for you, and they snap on with little O-rings onto your suit. Then when you put the helmet on, it's quite heavy, and once they snap it down, you hear yourself breathing. For a few moments there, you get some claustrophobia. I did anyway.
The suit was designed to have 100% oxygen in the nasal cavity area and then compressed air in the rest of the suit, so that if you were to lose cabin pressure at 80,000 feet or above, the nitrogen bubbles in your system would come out and your blood would boil. So you need some kind of an environment around you. That's what the pressure suit provided.
Suited up, the pilot and RSO are ready to be escorted out to the aircraft for their first flight together.
There are 3 people that do nothing but strap you into the cockpit. And unlike a lot of aircraft, this cockpit is down sort of in the bowels of the aircraft. You get placed down inside the cockpit and strapped in. And then the canopy is lowered on top of you. You don't even lower it yourself. Someone has to do that for you and lock it down. You're kind of becoming part of the aircraft, and it's becoming part of you.
A shot of triethyl boron gas ignites the fuel, and the J-58 engines are started.
Where it really got impressive is when it starts taxiing out of the hangar. And it's 110 feet long, and so this thing keeps coming out, keeps coming out, keeps coming out, and all of a sudden you realize that's an awesome looking airplane as it gradually comes out of the hangar.
So here we were looking at an airplane that was going to be going 2,000 miles an hour, and its design was so futuristic. It was like no other airplane that had ever been designed, because it was going to fly in an environment that no other airplane had ever been in.
Tower Aspen 30 is number 1 for takeoff.
I'll never forget how it feels to light those afterburners and feel one light before the other one does, and it jerks you pretty hard. And it accelerates rather rapidly. In just a matter of seconds, you're hitting 180 knots indicated airspeed, lifting off at 210, making sure you get the gear retracted before it overspeeds at 300 knots. And you keep pulling that nose up to try to achieve the 400-knot climb out. And in less than 2 minutes from brake release, you're pulling it out of afterburner and you're level at 24,000 feet. It's quite a ride.
I remember the first time I took the aircraft up to speed and to altitude, I went through Mach 1, and then I approached Mach 2, and it went through Mach 2 without the slightest indication of any problems, and I marveled at that. And then it rolled right on through Mach 3. Of course, none of us had ever been that fast before, but you did all of this effortlessly. And that was the feeling you had, that you had control of so much power on this aircraft that it was almost limitless.
As the SR-71 accelerates through Mach 3, the triple sonic boom is followed by a blast of heat radiating from its black skin that reaches temperatures of 1,100 degrees.
It truly flew through the air like a hot knife through butter. It really did. So it was pointy on every end, but it had elegance. But it was an elegance that was designed for performance.
After 10 months of grueling training, the SR-71 crews were ready to go operational. Flying over heavily defended areas in enemy territories would push both the aircraft and the crews to their limits. On March the 21st, 1968, the first SR-71 operational sortie was flown out of Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, Japan. The Vietnam War had been raging for 5 years, and the United States was determined to contain and defeat communism in Southeast Asia. The role of the SR-71 would be to gather photographic and electronic intelligence of their enemies. They would fly daily over territories where one mistake could cost the lives of the crew and provoke an international incident.
In this program, the margin for error was so narrow, almost to nothing, that it really was the pressure of flying the mission flawlessly. So that, because if anything went wrong, we would be on the 6 o'clock news.
SR-71 missions were always carefully planned. In their briefing, the crews thoroughly study the mission route and surveillance areas and are warned of potential enemy threats.
Well, we tried to stay well informed about our adversaries' capabilities, about their ability to track our movement, our aircraft, any potential surface-to-air missiles that might be a threat to us, or any aircraft that might be a threat to us during a flight.
3 hours before the mission, they have a medical checkup and eat a high-protein meal of steak and eggs. The crew chief and his staff spend hours inspecting the SR-71 for any possible mechanical problems.
Pre-flight on the aircraft starts around midnight. We're staying for a 6 or 7 o'clock launch in the morning. And there's a lot of procedures that you go through. Cameras have to be uploaded. The bays are in the forward section of the chines, and then the cameras was electrically lifted up into it. We always loaded a light load of fuel for the mere fact that it's a lot easier on the airframe, it's a lot easier on the tires, the landing gear, and so forth like that.
There was always excitement in the air, electrifying. Every time you fly the airplane, everybody was keyed up. Everybody did their job and did it extremely well and took it very, very seriously.
Everybody worked together, and it was a team effort, and everybody knew that they was striving for that one thing, and it was perfection. The SR-71 demanded it because there was no room for error. When you get ready to launch the airplane there, things are happening so fast that you send the airplane off, and of course you're going to be concerned about whether or not it's going to come back. You're constantly thinking whether everything is correct or not, and those questions kind of creep into your mind.
Above 60,000 feet, the crew switches off all contact with air traffic control. Only a select few know where the Blackbird goes next.
The pilot in the SR-71 spent all of his time flying the airplane. The airplane operated on autopilot, that's true, but you had to kind of hand fly the autopilot. It demanded your attention all the time, and so the fellow in the back seat, the reconnaissance systems officer, he handled all of the auxiliary systems.
Sitting in the rear cockpit, the RSO must keep the plane on the black line, the pre-planned route to the target. As they reach enemy territory, he concentrates on the radar and defensive systems, trying to jam enemy communications in the event of a missile launch.
We carried the same type of jammer that was used throughout the Vietnam War by all of the fighters and bombers, which attempted to jam the communication between the radar site and the missile itself. Once they began the communication, our indications in the cockpit would go from warning to jamming, and it would be jamming that communication link to the missile.
But sometimes the enemy would try to attack the SR-71 by launching a missile without any radar guidance.
We were coming in off the water, headed inland, and the pilot says, "Hey, Reg, look out your right window." And here is what looks like a telephone pole about 150 yards away that's going just straight up. He said, "Was that close enough?" And I said, "Yeah, that was close enough."
Our main defense, if we were fired upon, was increased speed. And we could increase 100 knots, 200 knots in just a matter of seconds, which is a lot of differential in speed for a missile to cope with.
Approaching the target area, the RSO concentrates on operating the high-tech surveillance equipment. The 6 different cameras were able to photograph 100,000 square miles in an hour, producing images with such high resolution that a vehicle's number plate could be clearly identified.
The surveying capability of the aircraft was fantastic because you're going in a straight line for 2,000 miles. You could look out as far as the horizon goes, and from horizon to horizon, that's what you could survey.
For the crews flying in the top 1% of the atmosphere, it gave them a unique perspective on the world.
The first thing that you notice that's phenomenal is the change of the sky color. At about 60,000 feet, the sky turns a deep indigo steel blue that is so mesmerizing. You just want to look at it. It's fascinating.
You know, if I flew the aircraft up near the Arctic Circle, and I might actually traverse dawn to dusk and back 2 or 3 times. I've seen the sun rise and set 3 times on a flight, which is very unusual. I mean, we're actually flying faster than the Earth's rotation, so we're outrunning the sun.
On landing, the highest priority is to download the cameras, known as sensors, as quickly as possible.
Everyone was deeply concerned that their sensor performed as it was designed to do and programmed to do. So there was a lot of serious concerns there, and there was a lot of happiness because the plane had made a successful mission and the crews were home.
The films were then rushed off for processing and analysis.
Well, the photo interpreters were a brilliant bunch of young airmen, and they could look at that film and they could spot something had been moved or a new facility was going up. They were great at that. And they would call their supervisors if they saw something of interest, you know, that needed to be flagged and brought to the attention of the intelligence people.
One of the things I enjoyed about flying the Blackbird was knowing that information is power. The information we would gather could very well preclude bombs having to be dropped at all. It could save a lot of people's lives by having the right information at the right time.
The Blackbird crews were successfully infiltrating enemy territory and gathering a massive intelligence about their adversaries. But with the Iron Curtain still firmly in place and Soviet technology constantly improving, how long would the SR-71 remain flying safely in such dangerous areas? In October 1973, they would face their most crucial test. In the early 1970s, the world's attention focused on the Middle East. Tension between America's ally Israel and her Arab neighbors was reaching breaking point. On the 6th of October 1973, Soviet-backed Egypt and Syria attacked Israel and made dramatic territorial gains. With the Middle East caught up in the politics of the Cold War, an Israeli defeat would bring with it the threat of nuclear conflict. The Soviets had launched their Cosmos 596 satellite, bringing them immediate intelligence from the battlefronts and putting them one step ahead of the United States. It was time to bring in the Blackbird. The SR-71 would fly directly from Griffiths Air Force Base, New York, to the Middle East. The flight would be over 11 hours long, with 6 refuelings. No Blackbird crew member had ever experienced such a lengthy, complex mission.
I flew a 10.5-hour training flight, and I was beat. By the time I got out of the airplane, I said, whew, that's about as far as I can fly. But when they said you can fly 11 hours and 20 minutes, you jump up and you say, yes, sir, you know, I'll be happy to do that.
I picked Jim Shelton as the first pilot to fly the mission. I knew he was an extremely reliable, highly qualified, and had done extremely well in all of his training and everything. So I had total confidence that if the mission could be done, that Jim would do it.
On the 12th of October, under codename Giant Reach, the mission began.
We took off from Rome, New York around 1 or 2 in the morning because you want to be over a target area somewhere between 11 and 1 o'clock. This allows you to have some shadows so the photo interpreters can go ahead and judge elevation, but yet get you the best sun position you can have.
By 10 o'clock in the morning, the SR-71 had reached its second refueling point over Portugal. Because of the highly classified nature of this mission, no one other than the tanker crew knew they were coming.
On the way into that particular refueling, the tanker crews said the Portuguese control kept calling out an airplane in relation to the tanker. And the tanker says, you know, we don't see anybody. Of course, they knew it was us, but I'm sure that they could tell on their scope something was happening because the 2 blips merged for a while, for 20 minutes, and then this one accelerates on.
Jim Shelton approached the Egyptian coastline. The Egyptians were well equipped, with their Soviet allies constantly replenishing their supplies.
Russia was developing the SA-5, which was a missile that would go up, well above your altitude, and come back down at you. And yes, that was a concern.
With 160 SAM missile sites, many secretly commanded by Soviets, and sophisticated radar tracking systems, they were on full-scale alert, watching the skies for any enemy infiltration.
As soon as we got into range of the Egyptian SAM sites, they started tracking us.
The Egyptians, alerted to an unidentified aircraft appearing on their radar systems and presuming the plane to be either Israeli or American, scrambled to launch their surface-to-air missiles. 80,000 feet above them, traveling at a speed of over Mach 3, Jim Shelton's Blackbird was gathering thousands of feet of film, capturing the extent and whereabouts of the Egyptian military forces.
You had the radar receiver in the back cockpit. Gary could tell me that, yes, now we're being tracked by some SAM missile. We need to do something. So at that particular point, we would jam, we would speed up.
By the time the Egyptian missiles were ready to fire, the SR-71 had already cleared their airspace and was speeding towards Israel. But the heavily armed Israelis also had no knowledge of this covert Blackbird operation and immediately went on full alert.
When we rolled in on the first pass over Israel, my defensive system just lighted up like a pinball machine. And I indicated to my pilot, I got all these indications back here. I said, just, maybe keep your eyes open, because it seems like somebody's shooting at us.
Despite launching a barrage of missiles, the Israelis did not manage to shoot their presumed enemy out of the sky. The Blackbird headed back to the United States.
We got everything we were tasked for, got the airplane back, and that's the first time airplane, the SR-71, had flown 11 hours and 20 minutes. After we land, the next couple of days, Gary and I get invited to the Pentagon. Admiral Moore, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, wanted to thank us for the work that we had done, and they showed us some photos.
The photographs were detailed enough to show how many Israeli tanks had been destroyed in the initial battles.
We were to go ahead and resupply the Israelis with some of their lost equipment. So the photo interpreters are counting the number of tanks that we would be replacing. So it was a very crucial point for the SR-71.
It was a very sensitive mission, and there was a lot of pressure to get that first one done. Jim and his backseater nailed them. He got all the targets, and everyone was absolutely elated.
8 more successful Blackbird missions supplied detailed intelligence that the war was now turning in Israel's favor. With this information, the United States was able to broker an eventual ceasefire on the 24th of October.
I think the SR-71 contributed greatly to the resolution of that war. No one knew the airplane could fly that far and perform a mission like that and come back and hand the intelligence people the product.
The Blackbird was also a record breaker. On September the 13th, 1974, Kelly Johnson's SR-71 flew across 7 time zones from London to Los Angeles in a race with the sun, taking just 3 hours, 47 minutes, and 39 seconds.
For the record-breaking flight, I was over at the FAA Control Center, and the controller is a huge screen, and he said, here's a 747 coming out of Phoenix. And it'd go blip. Blip. It moved about ½ inch or ¼ inch. He said, okay, get ready. Here comes the SR-71 out of Canada. And it goes, brrrt, and there goes my antenna, brrrt, there goes Idaho. and get ready, boom! And it almost blew us out of the way because he was right overhead. And he was starting to decel, but he managed to blow the windows out of Zsa Zsa Gabor's house in the Hollywood Hills.
In the same year, the Blackbird had flown a record-breaking flight from New York to London. 52 years earlier, Charles Lindbergh had flown approximately the same distance in 33 hours. The SR-71 made the flight in 1 hour, 55 minutes, and 42 seconds. But the SR-71 would soon be needed in a more serious capacity. Another Soviet-backed Middle Eastern enemy was on the warpath and was determined to humiliate the United States. There would be no better way than to shoot the SR-71 out of the sky. Tension between the United States and much of the Arab world continued. In 1972, the revolutionary leader of Libya, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, announced that he was giving aid to terrorist organizations in Europe and the Middle East. He issued repeated threats to America and indicated that those who crossed the Gulf of Sidra would be crossing a line of death. By the spring of 1986, worldwide terrorism had reached unprecedented levels. President Reagan's patience was wearing thin.
Gaddafi deserves to be treated as a pariah in the world community. We call on our friends in Western Europe and elsewhere to join with us in isolating him. If these steps do not end Gaddafi's terrorism, I promise you that further steps will be taken.
Then, on the 5th of April, 1986, a bomb exploded in a West Berlin disco. Among the 232 casualties, 2 American servicemen were killed. The United States found clear evidence that Libyan leader Colonel Gaddafi was behind the attack. At RAF Mildenhall in England, SR-71 pilot Brian Shule knew that they were on course for retaliation.
Now, we knew that something was going on because all of a sudden the Mildenhall base had an extra security arm of guards around it. Our BOQ living quarters had armed guards at the doors. The next thing you knew, every tanker in the Air Force practically was landing at Mildenhall. There were new airplanes on the ramp that you hadn't seen before, and it was no secret to every Brit aircraft spotter out there that there was something going on.
The British government would allow the United States to fly the missions from their bases in England. At 9:30 a.m. on the 14th of April, the SR-71 crew members were ordered to a top-secret briefing. They were informed that the 48th Tactical Fighter Wing at Lakenheath would be striking selected Libyan targets within hours.
When we heard the words, this morning at 2 a.m., the F-111s are launching, we were a little surprised that, well, this is for real, it's happening.
The SR-71's job would be to record the results of the airstrikes against Tripoli and Benghazi. That night, the F-111s began their mission.
So when we're trying to sleep, in the middle of the night, you're awakened by the roar of F-111s taking off. Listening to that, it was quite serious at that time because we knew maybe some of those people wouldn't come back.
By the time the SR-71 crews arrived to prepare for their mission, the F-111s were already bombing Libya.
My fellow Americans, at 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities. Today, we have done what we had to do. If necessary, we shall do it again.
The 111s had a number of targets to take out missile defenses, sites and things, but also all the terrorist training camps, and to really hit Gaddafi's headquarters, basically, to really show him that we're going to come right into his backyard. Our job was to come and assess everything that was done, gather pictures and target data for maybe succeeding strikes.
Flying in directly after a bombing raid, the crews could expect Libya's sophisticated air defense network to be on full alert and eager to retaliate.
We were subsonic off Land's End, getting ready to get to the tanker, and we saw the string of F-111s coming back. And my backseater, Walter, was counting the planes as they came back and passed us. And he came up one short. And he knew that somebody had not made it home, and we were very sad in the cockpit at that time before we even started that we had lost an entire crew. But yet, it gave us more resolve.
After refueling and now traveling at supersonic speeds, they neared the Gulf of Sidra and the Libyan target area.
We're doing over 2,000 miles an hour at this point, and we were like a speeding bullet, except faster. And we had crossed the line of death with impunity.
But the Libyans, equipped with the latest Soviet long-range high-altitude missiles, posed the greatest threat yet to the Blackbird.
It was at that time that Walter started picking up some missile signals. He got 2 indications and then actually got a launch indication. And we had a big decision to make where we were running into the target area before we made the turn. Do we continue to that point where Gaddafi's headquarters were, or do we make a turn away now to save ourselves from the missiles? And our decision was to push the throttles forward. And we thought in 14 seconds we can beat that missile to that point and then make the turn. Made the turn, went feet wet, got to the coast, and I will tell you, that was probably the fastest I've ever seen the SR-71 fly.
They'd outrun the missile, gathered the photographic intelligence, and were now heading away from the danger zone.
Walt said, okay, you can pull it back now. My hand was still locked in the forward position there. We were seeing Mach numbers that were a little scary, that we had not seen before, and the jet did it effortlessly.
The intelligence photos that were brought back clearly showed that the bombing mission had been a success. It was decided there would be no need to risk more American airmen's lives over Libya with further bombing.
We brought back the confirmation of to whether we needed to go in again or not, what we had really done, where their defenses were, what they really had. But we made a statement to Gaddafi, and if you'll notice, you remember, you didn't hear a lot from him for a long time after that.
But despite the success of the SR-71s over Libya, its days were numbered. At the end of the 1980s, it was decided that the cost of operating the SR-71 was no longer sustainable. The Blackbird program was terminated. From now on, all American surveillance would be carried out by satellites.
The reason that was given was that it was too expensive. Well, it's reconnaissance. That's sometimes that can be very expensive. And if you don't have reconnaissance, you're pretty blinded. And now they like to say that the satellites can do it all. And satellites can do a great deal, and they're magnificent capabilities. But there are things they can't do, and there are things that are unique that only the SR-71 can do.
On December the 20th, 1989, the SR-71 made a final pass down the runway at Lockheed's Burbank plant in honor of all those who worked on this exceptional plane. Kelly Johnson was there to pay an emotional farewell to his favorite creation.
You can't say enough about Kelly Johnson himself. You know, he was an absolute aeronautical genius. Working for Lockheed, I think he's made the greatest aircraft that ever existed. There's just something about the sleek SR-71 that makes it in a class of one. There is no other.
Impressive to the last, the Blackbird set 4 international speed records while being delivered to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum.
People love a winner. They love when someone is the best in their field. This aircraft was the best in its field. It was the prime speed machine of the world. Every speed and altitude record that it set, it holds to this day.
The SR-71 Blackbird served 6 different presidents and saw action on hot and cold war fronts alike. And despite being shot at over 4,000 times, no aircraft was ever lost to enemy fire.
It is the only operational airplane in the history of the American Air Force in which no Air Force crew members were ever killed. That's a record that no other airplane has. And when you consider the environment in which it flew, the speed, the altitude, the temperatures, that's a real credit to Kelly Johnson. I flew the airplane for almost 9 years, and I initially checked out in early 1957. So I flew the airplane a long time after Mr. Powers went down in 1960, including all of the Cuban missions and missions in Vietnam and missions at other locations around the world. Well, of course, when he went to be selected for the program, none of us had seen the airplane. But we knew now of its existence, and we had seen photographs of it. and everyone was very excited. Now, I had been flying the U-2 for almost 9 years, so I knew my days in that program were bound to be numbered. And usually what happens when you leave a program like that, you go to a headquarters in a staff position and you get to fly a desk for several years. And I certainly didn't want that to happen. I wanted to continue to fly as all pilots do. So when I was given the opportunity to start all over with another brand new program, I was just absolutely delighted. Flying the aircraft in transitioning from the U-2 was quite a radical transition, because the airplane was much bigger, heavier, handled considerably different. The U-2, for example, had a yoke, had a wheel like a multi-engine airplane has, whereas the SR-71 had a stick like most fighters would have. And having been flying in fighters for many years before I got into reconnaissance, I was overjoyed to see a stick in the cockpit instead of a wheel. But the B-58 pilots, I think, who came into the program probably found that transition very easy, because I think it handled subsonically quite a lot like the B-58 Hustler bomber did. Now, when you transitioned to supersonic performance, then the aircraft became very demanding on the pilot and the backseater, our RSO, Reconnaissance Systems Officer. It demanded all of your attention all the time. You didn't dare spend much time looking at the scenery or watching the world go by. You had to be flying that airplane every second of the time. And in contrast to the U-2, which had subsonic speeds, so it wasn't anything that was too demanding, had a nice autopilot. I've taken naps and written letters and read a chapter in a book when I'm flying the U-2 over the ocean or someplace where I'm not asked to do anything except get from point A to point B. You would never do that in the SR-71. You have to fly the airplane every bit of the time. But again, it's still a very, very honest airplane. I don't think anyone who flew the airplane had any reservations about the nature of the mission or what we were doing with the mission, where we were flying, what our mission objective was, what we were trying to collect, whether it was electronic intelligence or whether it was photo or radar. We had all those systems on board the airplane, and so we had multiple targets that we were looking for, and some of them involved overflights and some of them involved peripheral work. And I don't think anyone was really concerned about that aspect of the mission at all. In fact, it used to be rather enjoyable when MiGs would be launched to intercept the SR-71, because they delighted in trying to do that. They would love to have been able to shoot down an SR-71. Of course, they never could. But you could see contrails of the MiGs when they were scrambling and coming up, and it was kind of like tweaking the lion's tail. You could just ignore them and watch them fall out of the sky and just press on with the mission. So in that sense, it was a little bit of entertainment for us. Flying the aircraft at Mach 3 was almost disappointing, because there was no particular sensation of speed. You were too far above everything to get a sensation of speed. The most impressive thing going on would be watching the instruments and seeing what an amazing Mach number you would just pass through. I remember the first time I took the aircraft up to speed and to altitude. I'd been supersonic before in a number of airplanes, but all of a sudden in this aircraft I went through Mach 1, and then I approached Mach 2, and it went through Mach 2 without the slightest indication of any problems, and I marveled at that. And then it rolled right on through Mach 3. And of course, none of us had ever been that fast before, but depending upon the airplane that particular day, if it was a nice day and the airplane was nice to you, why, you did all of this effortlessly. And that was the feeling you had, that you had control of so much power on this aircraft that it was almost limitless. And when you got to the desired speed and altitude, you actually had to throttle back. And you'd be cruising at 2,000 miles an hour with the throttle way back from its normal full power climb performance. So the impression you had is that you just had a vehicle with unlimited power and speed potential. Well, the 2 years that I was wing commander, 73 through 75, I think there were two events that highlight the tour that I had of that command. One was, of course, the October missions over the Middle East, and the other was the opportunity to, for the first time, put the aircraft on public display overseas. And in the process of getting there, we were authorized to set some world speed records and to take the aircraft into Farnborough Air Show in the UK. Getting it over there and putting it on display was enough to get us all very excited, but then to be allowed to set the speed record, which we knew we would set anyway, whether they acknowledged it or not, but they allowed us to make the official run and document the speed run. So again, I picked Jim Sullivan, who at that time was the chief of standardization. I always pick my chief of standboard as my #1 guy to fly the big mission. And again, this was going to be a pre-announced attempt at a world record, and we had to do it. Once you pre-announce it, you can't afford to fall down. And so we were very concerned that this go as planned. We actually launched 2 airplanes out of California, and the record attempt was to be from New York to London. So we had 2 airplanes flying, I think it was 30 minutes apart. And if something happened to Sullivan before he got to New York, because once he started, he was on his own, but if something happened to his airplane before he got to New York for some reason, then the second airplane would make the speed run. But his aircraft worked flawlessly all the way across, and so we set that speed record of, I think it was 1 hour and 55 minutes from New York to London. And then we were given the opportunity to set another world speed record on the return flight. So I picked another crew. This time I picked a young crew. I wanted the young guys to know that they also had a chance to participate in these things. So I picked a young crew. Buck Adams was the pilot who later retired as a general officer. But Buck flew from London to Los Angeles and set a world speed record in 3 hours and 55 minutes. Now those records would have been much shorter, except that we had to do some in-flight refueling. We had planned on going to London unrefueled. The airplane is perfectly capable of doing that. But the London weather was terrible, strangely to say. And so we knew we were going to arrive in the London area, and we would still be at speed and altitude over London, so we had to swing way over the English Channel halfway to Paris and back to descend and decelerate to come back to Farnborough to land. And I knew we were going to be on fumes when you put all that together, and we had to have completely good visual conditions in order to attempt that. So much to Kelly Johnson's dismay, I directed that we have an in-flight refueling partway across. And he called me on the phone as soon as he got the word. He was most upset with me for putting in that refueling. And I said, Kelly, it's going to add maybe 10 more minutes. It'll be a world record no matter what. And he said, yes, but I want to do it unrefueled. The airplane can do that. I said, I know it can do that, but it can't do it safely under these conditions. The weather is just too bad. We don't even begin to meet the Air Force requirements for fuel reserve. And if we're going into an instrument condition up there, Jim has to have some fuel reserve. So he finally allowed us out that he'd let me do that, but he was very unhappy. But he was there when the airplane landed, as I was. We were all in London at Farnborough waiting for the airplane. And when he landed, Kelly Johnson was absolutely ecstatic. And he was so happy. He threw a big party for us that night. And so all was forgiven after the record was set.
And what was it set at?
It was 1 hour, 55 minutes from New York to London. Yeah, that was pretty good. The previous record was something like 4 or 5 hours, owned by a British pilot, military pilot.
So smashed that one,
We
and no
smashed
one's
that.
ever beaten it?
No, nobody could. No, it'll never be beaten.
A United States Air Force Strategic Air Command weapon system. The SR-71, a highly sophisticated reconnaissance aircraft of the 60s, still ahead of the state of the art in the 70s, was first announced in February 1964. The program was started initially with a systems project office given specialized management authority, and answering directly to Air Force headquarters. As the program progressed, the Specialized Management Authority was transferred to the present Advanced Systems Program Office with complete administrative, engineering, and logistics responsibility. A pattern now accepted for several key Department of Defense programs. The Lockheed Advanced Development Projects, nicknamed the Skunk Works since the early 40s, well known for its ability to produce in a tight security atmosphere, was selected to proceed with this highly sensitive program. A global reconnaissance system that would sustain altitudes above 80,000 feet at speeds beyond 2,000 miles per hour. With the experience gained on the YF-12 interceptor program, the task of producing the SR-71 was underway. The airframe and systems design was rapidly finalized. Engineering drawing release moved into high gear. Titanium, a light, high-temperature resistant metal, was selected to endure the torturous environment of triple sonic flight. A shop workforce, already skilled in working with titanium, was expanded as production tooling and assemblies take shape. Ship number 1 moved into final assembly. Soon another milestone is reached. Maintaining tight security and under the cover of darkness, serial number 950 leaves the assembly plant. The convoy delivering the first airplane arrives at the flight test facility. This new member of the family of Blackbirds made its debut just 22 months after go-ahead. Production aircraft scheduled for evaluation soon arrived at Edwards Flight Test Center. Almost concurrently, Lockheed and Air Force flight test efforts proved the airplane and systems. Meanwhile, facilities at Beale Air Force Base in Northern California were being readied to receive SAC's new Mach 3 Plus aircraft. A new team was being formed. Members were arriving on base daily. The Lockheed ADP Field Engineering Support Group, formed early in the test program, arrived at the operational base, consisting of a small group of engineers, logistics, and systems personnel. Equipped with fast response procedures, they brought the manufacturer's entire support as close as the commanding officer's telephone. The Physiological Support Division was busy processing flight crews selected from the many highly qualified volunteers from throughout the Air Force. Personnel were scheduled into training. Animated aids familiarized students with the internal workings of the engine and system components. Functional aids utilizing actual airplane parts are used to develop operational and maintenance skills. Indoctrination with the spacesuit life support system required by the crew provides the newly assigned team members with first-hand information relating to the SR's hostile operating environment. Transition to the SR was rapidly being accomplished. With introduction to the flight simulator, the goal of flying the Blackbird is in sight. Flight crews experience the operation and performance of the airplane and reconnaissance systems in a realistic simulation of flight. Flight crew and maintenance training was proceeding on schedule. The all-important day is here. An anxiously awaited member of the team arrives on base. This first Blackbird received by the 9th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing was an SR-71B, a trainer. Enthusiastic team members are on hand to congratulate the commander and welcome the star performer. The pace quickens. Additional aircraft arrive. The new birds are on a busy flying schedule. Crews are eager to take to the skies. The SR's dagger-like shape is thrust through the sky by more power than 45 diesel locomotives. During flight, the cockpit remains comfortable, while just outside, airplane skin temperatures exceed a searing 600 degrees. The men flying this phenomenal machine soon were routinely flying Mach 3 and beyond. The team, proud of their bird and the crews that fly them, established an exclusive club. At an impressive ceremony, each crew member is awarded a Mach 3 Plus pin and certificate, honoring his first flight at 2,000 miles per hour. The Strategic Air Command's 9th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing has flown thousands of hours at Mach 3. They have pioneered sustained operational flight above 80,000 feet at speeds beyond 2,000 miles per hour, carrying forward the tradition of unarmed reconnaissance. Living up to their motto, peace through surveillance, by providing information for the security of the United States and the free world. The SR-71 in a single flight has flown over 15,000 miles. On one mission, it is capable of mapping a section of the world equal to a path 60 miles wide from San Francisco to New York. The incredible Blackbirds and the team that operates them are justly proud guardians of peace through surveillance.